Hi, everyone. My name's Stephen Rupsch, and I am delighted to have been asked to talk about this particular speech by Emilia from Othello. Thank you, Carolyn, so much for asking me. This is a big treat for me because I'm a teacher, but I'm also a director. That's what I really, really, really love to do. And I love Shakespeare because there's so much amazing stuff in there. And you can always find, as a director, as a designer, and as an actor, you can always find amazing stuff in these monologues and soliloquies. So let's get down to it. The speech that we're talking about is from Act 4, Scene 3 of Othello, characters of Emilia, who is described in some, when you look at the dramatist persona, they say the wife of Iago, Iago being a pretty famous character. But also I've seen in some versions that she's described as a maid, which I would quibble with a bit. She's not really a maid. She's not a super high status. She's not really a lady in waiting, but she has more status than a maid. And she's also really close to Desdemona, who we find out later has a bad end. Well, so does Emilia, so does Iago, and so does Othello. But what we see in this particular moment is one of Shakespeare's kind of amazing moments of comedy within this tragic circumstance. And we see Emilia at the beginning of the play. She is kind of not very strongly drawn, not as deep, but now in this scene, we see something more of her, and we get to see her humor and her intellect, which is great because, I mean, Iago teases her at the beginning of the play, calls her foolish, being kind of stupid, and she's not, though, not at all. So the monologue itself is placed in the fourth act. It is in Desdemona's bedchamber, and at this point, I'm going to assume that you guys kind of know the gist of what happens here. But what has just happened is that they've had a dinner party, and Othello has publicly shamed Desdemona because of his suspicions about her infidelity. And now they've sent the guest home, and he says, "Go to bed, I'll be back for you." And so we suspect that Desdemona knows that something bad might happen, and that gets revealed a little bit in the scene because she goes into her bedchamber. She tries to let Emilia go quickly. Now, Emilia would normally, as her aide, help undress her and things like that. The first thing that she says, though, is, "Did you put those special sheets on the bed that she asked for specifically?" And Emilia says, "Yes, I have." And she says, "Well, if I die, wrap me up in those sheets." So we know that Desdemona knows that some bad stuff is coming. And I suspect, I mean, from an actor and a director's point of view in particular, you're looking at the scene, you're thinking Emilia is like in this weird situation where her friend or her employer, however you want to say it, but someone that she is close to is feeling despondent. So she tries to, make her laugh. She tries to keep it a little bit light. And so they have this really interesting conversation. And it starts with this kind of weird lament that Desdemona starts singing because she talks about her mom's maid who had this song about jilted lover, and is the Willow song, I call it, which is this kind of haunting thing. And she, even in the middle of it, just says, "Oh, do you hear a knock?" Like this kind of portend is coming. And then they have this kind of interesting conversation about, like, why do people cheat on each other? Why does that happen? Do you think that you would? And Emilia is like, maybe, for all the money in the world. And Desdemona is like, no. She says, well, if it means that my husband could get on a throne, I might do it. And so Desdemona is kind of like playing along. But then Emilia has this wonderful monologue, which is what we're going to talk about right now. But I do think that it's the husband's fault if wives do fail or fall. So right off the top, she's not blaming the wives who are having an affair, but the husbands, because, as she explains it, the husbands are straying, so why wouldn't the wives do the same thing? It's kind of common sense. In this particular monologue, by the way, this is what I would categorize as a monologue rather than a soliloquy. It is very, the language is pretty understandable, for people who are not used to poetry. And she's very direct in saying specific things about, so the husbands stray and then they treat us badly, but women are human and we feel the same thing. So why would they better watch their step, because if they stray and they go away and they spill their treasures into foreign laps, as it were, then they better watch their step and make sure that they know why, their wives would stray. Then let them use us well, else let them know the ills we do, the ills instruct us so. It is a great, fun, sassy monologue. And I've heard it many times in different auditions for Shakespeare and stuff like that. This is a great monologue for a slightly more mature actor who is looking for a role that's a little bit more sassy and stuff like that. It's always fun to hear. But we also look at what's happening in the play itself, because the scene after this is going into Act 5 and everything goes to hell after that. So we have a nice little laugh. And this is the thing that Shakespeare does, which is not what's happening over at the continent in France. They're doing all their kind of neoclassic ideals, but Shakespeare still is loving combining tragedy and comedy. And that was always this kind of like really effective way of affecting the audience in a really powerful way. You lead them into this very tragic circumstance, but then you get them with a joke so they can let off some steam, and then boom, you slap them with the intensity of what that tragedy is all about. It's just like remarkable. And it's like this, it's a musical score of sorts to help the audience feel deeply and feel fast. Emilia is a really interesting and wonderful character because she realizes at the end that she might have screwed up, and she might have, her husband is Iago, and she realizes that she did some bad deeds for him without knowing it. And she gets brave. She finds out that Othello has killed Desdemona and confronts him and yells at him right there. And then when all the other guys come in, she's the one that says, hey, she's dead and he did it. And Iago, it's because of you. You set the whole thing up. And then he gets pissed, and then he ends up killing Emilia, right? But she does so and has a kind of a moment at the end where she is asked for forgiveness, but she's really smart. Everything that Emilia says is like super smart. And the opposite of that foolishness that Iago talks about at the beginning. We see the kind of a bad fate that can fall on women. Because 3 women in this play, 2 end up dead, and the other one is prostitute. Probably not going to end up well, just a guess. But the kind of indictment against how men use women is quite strong in this. Now, Iago uses everybody. And the other part about the characters that are interesting, if you look at Desdemona and Othello and Iago and Emilia, we have 2 different sets of 2 extremes. Iago is probably one of the most evil characters ever written. And he takes such pleasure in it. That's the thing. Emilia is not evil. She is practical. And she will take advantage when she needs to, I think. But she also has a deep, big heart, and she loves Desdemona. But Desdemona and Othello are really interesting because they're kind of guileless. And these 2 aren't. They have guile. And the fact that it's the budding of these 2 worlds together, which is what causes the tragedy. Now, the person who is doing this monologue, I will say, has a lot a really fun stuff to work with. The poetry is pretty straightforward. The iambics, just did a quick chart on this, and there's only a few irregulars. And I think that you can have some fun with some of the pauses in here, but not too much. But I think that having that knowing sass as you go is probably the best way to start with this. Thank you so much for listening. I could talk about Shakespeare stuff all the time, so I appreciate your patience and enjoy Liz's rendition of this beautiful monologue.
But I do think it is their husbands' fault if wives do fall. Say they slack their duties and pour our treasures into foreign laps. Or else break out in peevish jealousies, throwing restraint upon us. Or say they strike us, or scant our former having in despite. Why, we have galls, and though we have some grace, yet have we some revenge. Let husbands know their wives have sense like them. They see and smell and have their palates both for sweet and sour, as husbands have. What is it that they do when they change us for others? Is it sport? I think it is. And doth affection breed it? I think it doth. Is it frailty that thus errs? It is so too. And have not we affections, desires for sport, and frailty, as men have? Then let them use us well, else let them know the ills we do, their ills instruct us so.